Welcome back, everybody, to the 2022 Ingenium Professional Development Seminars. On behalf of Engineers Geosciences Manitoba, my name is Tanya Martins, and I'm a member of the Ingenium Task Group, and I'll be your moderator for today's keynote speaker. Throughout today's presentation, we encourage you to send in any questions you might have for the presenter using the chat. Please note this presentation is being recorded and it will be available through the Ingenium Hub starting tomorrow until January. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our presenter for this session, Lisa Stepnuk. Lisa is the Association's Director of Equity and Representation. Lisa, you can now share your screen and welcome.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I will do exactly that. I'll share my screen. And can you see that properly?
I sure can.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So like Tanya said, I'm the Director of Equity and Representation here at the Association. I've been here for just over 4 years, and I'm primarily responsible for the 30x30 file. Today, we're going to talk about retention and returnship. This is specific to women. We're going to talk about the stories behind some of the statistics. I'll be sharing both with you. I am broadcasting. There's a whole team broadcasting today from Treaty 1 territory. So these are the traditional and current territories of the Anishinaabe, the Nihiowag, the Oji-Cree, the Dene, the Dakota, and it is the homeland of the Métis Nation. Just a couple of weeks ago was October 4th, the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit people. And it's very important for us who work in the extractive and development industries, those of us who do, to make sure that we are considering the safety and security of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, intersex, and asexual people, as well as their equitable benefit from development at all stages of project planning, assessment, implementation, management, and monitoring. That is the first call for justice for that section 13, and I encourage us all to get familiar with the entire report, the calls for all of the professions, including our own. So before I jump into a snapshot of our current statistics, I'd like to just launch a couple polls so that I know who I'm speaking to in the audience, because we're not in the same room together. This is another way to do it. So Gemma, if you can launch the first poll, please. Okay, is this up? Can people see this on the screen? So I want to know if you are a professional engineer, a professional geoscientist, an engineering intern. All right, you can see that, you can read it. So please answer that question so I have an idea of who's in here and I can see it on the second screen. Okay, we still have some answers rolling in. Okay, I think we can probably end the poll now. And do the results pop up, or do I just, it seems like it's still open. Okay, so almost 80% of the audience is professional engineers, 3% with 1 geoscientist with us. We have 3 engineering interns and 3 who are none of the above. Okay, thank you. Can we do the next poll, please, Gemma? So we're mostly speaking to engineers today, mostly professional engineers. Okay, this one you can choose, this is multiple choice. So you can choose all that apply because some folks identify as Two-Spirit as well as another gender identifier. So I would just like to see, given that this is a presentation based on gender, who I'm talking to, who's in the crowd, who has come to the presentation today. Okay, everyone has answered. Okay, great. So we have almost 60% of our audience who identify as men and just over 40% who identify as women. Thank you. Can I get the next poll, please, Gemma? I'm going to do them all. I've got more for you. Okay. I am going to be talking as well about some of the research that was led by my colleague, Nicole Everett, the Indigenous Professionals Initiative Coordinator. with Indigenous practitioners registered with us here at the association. Okay. So most of the audiences does not identify as Indigenous, and we have one person who is Métis in the audience. Great, thank you so much. And I think we have one more poll. And at your place of work, are you great? Junior level, mid-career manager, executive, or is that not applicable for you? Perhaps you're not currently working in industry. Perhaps you're on leave. Perhaps you're looking for work. Okay. So we have 2 junior level position folks. We have 16 mid-career, 13 managers, 3 executives, 5 not applicable. Okay, thanks so much for answering that. That sort of helps me in visualizing who I'm speaking to and tailoring a little bit to that. Okay, thanks, Gemma. We can stop sharing the polls now, and I'll share with you some of our numbers. Okay, these are the ones from over just the past 3 years. So this is this metric 30 by 30 that we're tracking, the percent of newly licensed, women engineers. So it has, continuously hovered above and below 20%. You can see that for the total numbers there, it's 3 to 4 to 5 women or men, either way can make the difference. So this is, of course, a very attainable metric for us to hit 30% within the next, how many years do we have left? 7 years. But we've sort of been above 20% before. So we really want this to be a sustained effort, making systemic changes that will last. And when we look at the numbers for geoscientists, we have had a couple of really good years. So you can see that the total numbers are, of course, much lower, 3 out of 6, 4 out of 8, but the past couple of years, 50% of newly licensed geoscientists have been women. And the year before that, we had 30%. Less than 1% of our members are Indigenous. So this is, of course, one of the most underrepresented groups. For us to have proportionate representation in the province of Manitoba, we should be pushing 20% at least. And when we look at the total number of professionals, we are now at 11.5% of professional engineers who were women in 2021. Which is, this continuously grows, and I'll show you on the next slide the trend there. And when we're looking at professional geoscientists, the past few years have really helped bump that number, and we're now at close to 30% of professional geoscientists who are women who are registered with the association. This is a terrible slide, but I want you to know that it's available online if anybody wants to look further at the statistics. I'll just show you some of the columns I was speaking to. So the first one is that column of the newly licensed. You can see year by year how low it's dipped, how high it's gone. And you can also see in the last column the number of total practicing professional engineers. And we do have breakdown with respect to tracking Indigenous identity and the attrition of professional engineers. And we do look between practitioners who are domestically educated as well as those who are internationally educated. So please do go have a look at those numbers. They're available on our website under in our strategic plan PDF. We have a similar table for geoscientists, and we also have tables looking at the numbers for interns. So if we also want to look at the numbers for the Faculty of Engineering, which is always interesting to see, what's earlier in the pipeline than coming to us at the association. We've been at about 22, 23% for the past couple of years of students who identified as women in the Faculty of Engineering. We've been at over 6% of students who have identified as Indigenous. If we look at the NGAP students, so not all Indigenous students are enrolled in NGAP. But the last number we have for 2020 was 10%, 3 of 29. And we're looking at about 15 to 18% who were international students. Okay, now I'm going to start getting into a little bit of these stories. So we know the stats, we're tracking these year to year. And now we want to hear precisely from the practitioners we've been speaking to. So we conducted 2 studies. My colleague Nicole Everett, the Indigenous Professionals Initiative Coordinator, led this research, these focus groups with Probe in the summer of 2020. We interviewed 13 Indigenous practitioners who we were able to contact. And so we got some really good insights from them. And then the following year, we sent out again with Probe a survey to all of the women who either withdrew or were written off from their license. So whether they were interns or practicing professionals with the association, from 2006 to 2021. So over a 15-year period, that survey ended up being sent out to over 800 women. We got approximately 130 responses to the anonymous survey. We left an option for them to leave their contact information so that we could follow up with them with an interview process. We conducted 18 interviews from that was all coordinated by my colleague Lamia Khala, who also conducted, the bulk of the interviews, and I conducted a few of those as well. Now, due to those studies that we did, and then the presentations that followed from them, more people came forward with some of their stories. So I do have some quotes to share with you that did not come out of those initial studies. But as we create space for these conversations, of course, we're hearing from more and more women and more practitioners in general. Okay, so we'll start with some of the challenges and the reasons that women leave. So I'll give some quotes, and I'm also going to show you a few trends that were picked up in the reports. I worked for a construction company for several years. Constant misogyny, not only comments and how I was treated, but literally pictures of nearly naked women on the trailer walls on multiple sites. I was told to work overtime with no compensation and issues with quality control that made me very uncomfortable. I have no desire to return to a toxic workplace. I was tired of being verbally abused. This is a different respondent. I was tired of being verbally abused on a daily basis as a female engineer. I retrained to become a school teacher, which is what I am doing now. And I just want to say here that for both of these, when I have presented, I have gotten the responses that, this is hardly an isolated case. So in one presentation, an intern who was present said, oh yeah, I have a dozen of these stories, and I could talk to you about peers of mine, other women on site who would say the same thing. As for women who are retraining to become teachers, I definitely know more than one who has done this. Possibly for different reasons, however, but just in case, people think they might know who this person is, you might, and it could also be another person who has left the profession to retrain to be a teacher. This is one of the most egregious, the woman I spoke to here had the most egregious stories that I have heard to date. I was a practicing engineer in both the private and public sector at very well-known employers. In both cases, I was surrounded by extreme misogyny, hypermasculinity, sexism, and a toxic work culture that not only accepted these, but that thrived within them. Countless times over my career, I was the target of discrimination, bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual assaults. Of course, there were HR policies that state that the workplace should be free of these from occurring. However, they are just formalities and are not actually followed. I felt completely alone, targeted, and ashamed. I was in constant stress and fear anytime I left my desk or when a coworker or contractor approached me. This has all led to extreme emotional, physical, and mental health issues for me, and I am no longer a practicing member at this time. I don't even wear my engineering ring anymore because I feel like the entire profession I dedicated my adult life to has completely let me down and ruined my life. So obviously, when I am conducting some of these interviews or getting these responses, it brings up a lot of rage because we have, often these are coming from, and although I can't, identify them beyond this, but these are employers who we've been working with, who have endorsed or signed on to 30 by 30. And so we have to ask what's going on, what is not working here, what is effective and what is ineffective. And we do appreciate that these women are coming forward to let us know. These are some of the quotes that came from the focus groups. So, and these are all, oh, pardon me, skipped forward ahead. These are all quotes from Indigenous women who were part of those focus groups. So I was often reminded that I was an affirmative action hire and asked very inappropriate questions on Indigenous identity. Being Indigenous may help at entry-level positions, but it stops at senior level and management. That's from a First Nations engineer. I was always told being a woman Métis engineer would get me a job anywhere, but I was lucky to get the job I have, let alone anything else. You get hired and you think, woohoo, I've got this job, but then you find out they're not talking to you. I spent the first 6 months typing people's notes. Nobody encouraged you, nobody helped you, and you could see them helping each other. That's from a First Nations geoscientist. I don't think I ever had an experience where someone has been outright racist to me because people know they can't do that. But people are more subtle and they do it in subconscious ways. They do things like ignore my idea or dismiss my ideas. They don't talk to me directly, but to one of my coworkers, and that's from a First Nations engineer. And I do want to say that those who reported the most egregious forms of racism, so these examples of being ignored or dismissed or, basically seen as a diversity hire, were visibly Indigenous women. So those who were presented as white or were not visibly Indigenous reported less issues like this. Some said they've never had an issue at all. However, some did report that they would then hear racist comments or viewpoints, beliefs, and they suspected that it was because the person making them didn't know that they were speaking to an Indigenous person. And so often they would use humor to diffuse the situation. But it's important for those of us who are non-Indigenous to recognize that that is a way to sort of get through the day and a way to deal with these things that come up in the workplace. And it's still our responsibility to be obviously anti-racist and consider some of the things that we're saying and challenge our own beliefs. So a couple of other themes that came up that I won't share quotes for, but themes that emerged throughout this work, where people reported that they were not necessarily offered challenging or even engineering work. One woman reported that she was the designated note taker almost for her entire career and that this was seen as normal. It was even a joke. And several reported that gender discrimination and or an unsupportive workplace were one of the key reasons for changing careers or to leave the workforce to parent full-time. So that it just wasn't worth it for them anymore. And I won't read that paragraph. These are lifted from that paragraph. It's just to remind us that it is taken from the report. We also heard that returning from extended parental or medical leaves can be very daunting, and that what is required are supports like a workplace mentor to build back confidence in existing skill sets. And we're going to hear a bit later about how that is a really valuable return on investment. We heard a lot about mentorship from both of the studies that we conducted and how important mentorship is. So just to recap, we heard about sexual harassment and sexual assault. So these were things like grabbing sexual comments and pinups that went unaddressed. And sometimes, I heard from women that they were even silenced. They didn't hear back on after they filed the report, or the complaint spoke to as a senior person in the organization, or they were outright basically coerced into silence. There was sexist and misogynistic treatment. So this played out in either verbal abuse, poor treatment, yelling. I heard about bullying that was so evidently gender specific. The specific targeting of the only woman in her department. We heard about racism. So we know that BIPOC women, Black, Indigenous, and women of color are facing racist comments, assumptions, and opinions. And there is a lack of historical awareness about, For example, we did have one practitioner who said that some of their colleagues liked to sort of volunteer their opinions on the so-called Indigenous problem, whereas we know that the problem is, of course, anti-Indigenous racism and colonization. People who were not expected to progress in their career. They were made to feel undeserving of their position. And we've heard other stories from women, outside of these studies that's saying that almost every single time that they have been granted an interview, a position, or a promotion, that somebody has made a comment that they got it because they were a woman. So this, of course, is a direct undermining of their skill set and capabilities. Their quality control concerns are dismissed. Toxic and unsupportive workplace, sexist distribution of the work, no formalized or structured mentorship. Their ideas are dismissed or they're outright ignored. So obviously this is a pretty disheartening list. I am going to move on to some positives and things that have been done or that we can do about these. And then we'll have some questions that I'll send out to yourselves and to get the Q&A going. So what are the reasons women stay? So what we heard from Indigenous practitioners of all genders, really, but also from the Indigenous women who participated in NGAP, was very important. It was critical as a sort of place to go that's safer from some of the more racist comments that could be heard in the broader student population. It created an important sense of belonging that was culturally safe. And so couldn't say enough good things about NGAP. This really didn't hear negative. And that wasn't to say that people didn't identify, possible ways of improvement, which the NGAP staff are very aware of and always working on. But really, this was a chorus of, this is a vital program and it's important that it remain and keep being supported. I mean, it is already seen as a gold star of access programs to close the educational outcome gaps as a result of, racism in the delivery of education, critical underfunding, lack of prerequisites that are available in many Northern First Nations communities, etc. Some of the reasons that women stay. So obviously I've talked about a lot of negative things already, and I don't want to, of course, eliminate or erase or make invisible the positive. Of course, there are many, many positive stories. There are more and more women in the professions as peers, role models, and mentors. There are many good experiences, successful careers, ease with licensure. We heard a lot of this, respectful workplaces, and there are many positive, equitable workplaces, team supervisors, and mentors. The good is out there. However, we need to make sure that what we accept as the worst possible behavior is no longer sexual harassment, sexual assault, and people not being supported or dismissed. So I want to especially highlight this because sometimes people have found that perhaps the women in their circles who they're speaking to, who have had these positive experiences and successful careers, some people have come to me and said, I'm not hearing about anybody who has faced oppression in their engineering career or their geoscience career. And that's fantastic. Though obviously, I know that to be true, and we want that to be everybody's experience. But we definitely can't use that as an alibi or an excuse not to improve conditions across the board. Another great story is that one workplace reported, three women from the same workplace reported that they had a specific manager who co-created, supported, and normalized a culture of flexibility and part-time work, and that this was critical for them being able to stay on after their maternity leaves. And had this not been normalized and supported, they probably would have had to leave. They are all now high-level contributing practitioners in their departments. And this is, of course, a great story about, and a great example about the return on investment for making those things happen. It's just good business practice for retaining talent. They've been able to become leaders in the departments. They have been able to keep improving their technical expertise, and they are sort of vital contributors to the profession in Manitoba. Now I'd like to just go on to some of the reasons that women return. So women who have been on extended leaves from practice, either for maternity leave or for medical leave, or various other reasons. So they enjoy their work and careers, right? Women have just reported that they've invested a lot in engineering. They like doing the work and they want to come back to it. They want to see the benefits of their contributions. They want to benefit financially from their investment. We all know that it is not a cheap endeavor to go and get an engineering degree or two and to be pursuing a career. And in these cases where it's been possible, the return has been professionally supported by equitable work policies, practice, and culture. I'm going to now share with you a number of insights from Nazra Gladue, who is a professional engineer at Manitoba Hydro in the Transmission Services and Compliance Department. She gave me permission to share these insights, which she presented at our Industry Leadership Solutions event, the Manitoba 2030 Coalition event that we held in May. I'm going to be reading slides. Now, this is obviously not the recommended way to do a presentation, so these are a little bit longer quotes even than the previous ones. If you're more of a visual person than person who takes in information in an audio kind of way, feel free to turn down your volume, mute, or you can come back to the recording after as well and just read these on your own if they go in a little bit better. But I don't want to edit these because it is these quotes from women that I find very compelling in terms of what has not worked and what has worked. Like, these stories are very important, I believe, in conveying how very critical workplace culture and policy is. When there's good leadership, it's really important for us to highlight that and to hear it directly in the voices of the women who are reporting it. But again, I totally understand if this next part is going to be a bit long. So participate in the way that suits you best. Okay. So management has been accommodating and reassuring. Sorry, I forgot to give a bit more of a context. So Nazra was away from practice for medical leave, a sudden onset medical illness that came on and kept her away from practice for 6 to 7 years. You can all imagine that's a long time to be away from your practice. And so when she returned to the same position that she had had previously, which she said, not everybody has that opportunity. The position is not necessarily open and available again, but that was the situation for her. This is how her return was facilitated. So management has been accommodating and reassuring. I've been meeting with my manager every week to check in and continue to do so. And this has helped curb some of the concerns that I have felt in coming back from such an extended absence. Just knowing that I am supported by my colleagues and that they are rooting for my success has made a big difference in my desire to do a good job, and that the decision to return to the workplace was the right one. I was given smaller, attainable projects which were not time sensitive, which has helped in my confidence level while I reacquaint myself with the practices and procedures my department uses. I remember that I started peer reviewing my colleagues' assignments, which forced me to learn and research what I was reviewing in order to provide valuable feedback. And so I was able to slowly ramp up my technical knowledge in a gentle way. I also had to acknowledge my limitations during my initial return. It was important for me to let my colleagues know that I had been gone from the workplace for several years. I had also been working primarily with one team member when I started, so I had someone to ask my dozens of questions to. So we see the importance of mentorship here. And my team has been understanding on my limited but growing knowledge base, and that I am a little rusty and still learning. I found and appreciated that it takes time to build that knowledge base up again and become an expert. And before I read the rest of Nazra's quotes, I just want to say, because she doesn't say it very much herself, but she is a critical member of that department. People go to her to ask for advice on things. This was already 6 months ago, so I'm sure that has, only become more concretized. And, she carries a significant workload within her department. I have also found that finding a source of support has really helped me. My manager had put me back in touch with a former colleague who was considering a return to work herself from an extended absence. Sharing our experiences has been beneficial. I discovered that we shared some of the same insecurities and questions about returning to the workforce. I have also found that having the ability to be flexible with my scheduling in a gradual return to work environment allowed me to ease back in. I started at 3 hours a day, 3 days per week, and am now at 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and continue to be evaluated every few months to adjust my schedule as necessary. I have had the ability to start and end work hours based on my health needs and medical appointments. Working from home has also played a huge role in this and allowed me to concentrate on the work itself and not on the physical day-to-day tasks needed to get yourself ready and out the door. Now, even for those of us who may not be managing a medical condition or be immunocompromised, we have all seen how this can be beneficial, during the pandemic. The extra effort it takes to prepare, get out the door, and commute requires time and energy, right? So to not impose this for a job that doesn't require it can be key to retaining talent once again. And so we see here, like we saw with some of the intersection of both sexism and racism, these are one of the things that can address ableism in the workplace. So making it, so is it really a requirement to be physically present in the office or on the site? Obviously, we know that for site work, it is very important to be physically present, although there may be technologies that are evolving to allow inspections from remotely. I think we know that those are actually all in play already in certain workplaces or for very remote locations. So, you know, this is something that we can relate to. And I also just want to say that a part-time return to work was critical for my own return to the engineering profession. So when this job was offered to me, I did not have access to full-time childcare, and there was no way that I was going to be able to get it in time to accept the position. And what was offered to me by the association was they said basically, tell us how many hours a week you can work, and we will figure that out. So I came back and said, I can do 15 hours a week. I can get 15 hours a week of childcare. And they said, okay, we're going to break up your job description. We're going to break up the tasks. And what we were expecting to happen in the first 6 months was a research project, an environmental scan. So we are going to hire somebody else to do the research, to do the environmental scan, and you are going to get familiar with some of the other tasks that you have. And this allowed me to accept the job and return to the workforce because my kids were going to be starting, my youngest were going to be starting kindergarten in the fall. Had that not happened, I wouldn't have been able to accept the job. So again, from Nazra, I found that long-term illness or injury can significantly knock your confidence, and having a scheduled time to work on becoming technically competent can increase the likelihood of a successful return. Another recommendation would be to prioritize and give scheduled time to the returning employee for training and personal development activities. Hand in hand with this, I think that mandatory PD hour requirement reporting should be adjusted by the association to support an employee's gradual return so that they can prioritize becoming technically competent again. And I just want to say that as a result of this comment and others that we did see through our survey, is that the Continuing Competency Committee at the association does have a ProDev abatement application form, and the committee meets monthly to evaluate these and is quite accommodating. So it is a fairly rapid way to apply for that abatement, and it is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It does take a few minutes to fill out the form, and you do have to know where to look for it, but we are trying to communicate through our communications team and through our member services coordinator, Joy, the way that this happens when members go on leave and return from leave to active practice. Reasons women return, still from Nazra. I would also recommend having facilitated access to supports during the initial return to work phase. For example, I requested an ergonomic assessment by an occupational therapist, and it proved to be very beneficial for me. I think that this type of service would be valuable for addressing immediate physical concerns, limitations, or ordering necessary equipment if done earlier in the return to work process for both employees and both employees returning from any type of leave and in preventing re-injury. It would be helpful if this service were possibly initiated by the employer rather than requested by the returning employee following a physical strain. And so again, we see that if something can be, we can take a preventative measure. If this is something that is practiced by the employer as a quick returning to work kind of a project, or even for new employees, we can be proactive in making sure that we are preventing injury, and that employees who may be managing a physical ability issue can safely manage that with the support of their employer. Again, when we're comfortable, we are of course more productive and able to show up to our job in every way. And lastly, I found that when my contributions were acknowledged, no matter how small, it really made a difference in how I felt, that I was contributing, my efforts were appreciated, and that I was valued. This could be the single most important factor for employee retention, and who doesn't appreciate a job well done once in a while. So those were all of the insights that we did hear from Nazra. And now I'm going to just send out some questions for your consideration. So as executives, managers, and people with influence in or adjacent to engineering, geoscience, and the trades, what are our opportunities to eliminate harassment, assault, and or abuse in the workplace? So sometimes the question is brought to me, of course, about how I'm going to address it, which is a fair question given what is my job description here at the association. This is the purpose of my employment. However, I am not negotiating contracts, in your workplaces. I am not on those phone calls. I am not having those young women come report directly to me as their first point of contact. So these are all things, we all have a responsibility in our own workplaces to be able to at least handle, those first reports, figure out what the correct policy is, and make sure that those policies are alive in our workplace culture, that we are enacting them, that we are enforcing them, and we're figuring out what they are. We have a responsibility to know them. So this is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we are dealing with this, and we're not leaving this to women to have to deal with on their own. What are our leverage points? So again, how can we make sure that these things are written into contracts with clients, with contractors, into job descriptions when we're hiring people? What skill sets and outlooks are we looking for? Are we building the skill sets of both ourselves and our employees to adequately address harassment and to support targets? So these are skill sets, right? And I was in a national meeting a few weeks ago where somebody said, we can't all be EDI experts. We can't all be equity experts, and we don't have to be, because those experts exist. The important part is that we know where they are and we contact them. The other important part is that we take reports of harm seriously, and we know how organizationally we can deal with them, but we have to deal with them. We can't dismiss them, we can't ignore them, and we can't downplay them. And again, these are our skill sets. So once we demonstrate the willingness as just humans and professionals to want to deal with this, then we can build our skill sets. These are things that we can be continuing to improve along with our other competencies as professionals, because these things are happening in our workplaces and in our professions. Are we building the skill sets to adequately address racism and implement a practice of anti-racism? So the same issue applies here, right? These are skill sets, these are knowledge bases, and we can acquire them. We should be acquiring and practicing them over the course of our entire lifetimes, both professional lifetimes and personal lifetimes. Do our people have the skill sets to adequately support targets? Once again, these don't need to be in-depth skills and knowledge bases at the beginning. These are things we can work towards, but we at least need to know how to react at first when somebody challenges either ourselves for making a racist comment, or challenging our beliefs, an assumption that might underlie a comment, or for going ahead and making sure that the target can get the proper support that they need if we're a person that they can come to or confide in. What are our opportunities and leverage points to ensure that all departmental managers and supervisors can understand and explain what equity is and can implement it without punishment or stigma? So sometimes policies already exist around, for example, part-time work options, flexible work options, but they are, culturally dated on the day-to-day, they are punished, right? They are stigmatized and punished. So we've heard that that discrepancy can exist within some workplaces. Or again, like we heard from one of the women who reported being assaulted, bullied, and harassed, that those policies all existed within her workplace. But if they're not actively used and enforced by, people who are more senior or by your colleagues, then they're completely useless and they can in fact be harmful. Do our people understand the returns on investment for equitable practices such as excellent leave policies and benefits, part-time and flexible work, especially on return from leave and job sharing? So sometimes, this is seen as a little bit of, this is an accommodation, this is an inconvenience. I've worked in consulting. I know how demanding it is, how there can be really long days, how you might have to do a lot of travel, require a lot of time away. However, once you train somebody up and they develop that skill set, it's really pretty beneficial for organizations to have those people return to us. And so if we need to make sure that those policies are available to everyone, and again, I'd like to say here that it's important to make these available to people of all genders, because when we encourage and support and allow men to take leave and to have flexible work arrangements, we are then making sure that they are allowed to be involved in the caregiving roles of their personal lives, either as parents or caregivers to their own parents or elders or somebody in their community, and that this workload is then being more equitably distributed among men and women. And of course, I'm only speaking there in terms of a heterosexual partnership, but that is one of the ways to start equalizing the playing field. And job sharing, some people have reported that, like for myself, when I started here and was able to job share, we probably got more done because we brought in somebody who was very experienced at research, and I was able to focus on some of the other tasks and improve my knowledge of those parts of my job. And so that can be a way to manage or to accommodate for those times. And I don't even like the word accommodation, because we know that what equity means is that our workplaces across professions and can continue to be in engineering and geoscience were designed for men who were, heterosexual men who were supported in some way in their domestic lives. That's who these were designed for. And so we are working against that now, of course. And just because we don't explicitly state that women are explicitly excluded, non-binary people aren't explicitly excluded, we have policies and cultures that still push people out. And so we're trying to work against that. And so these aren't accommodations, they are really trying to reformat the way we work so we can all live better professional and personal lives. What are our opportunities to formalize equitable mentorship? So some places do have formalized mentorship opportunities, but often they don't. Mentorship happens anyway. It happens informally. You can see people creating relationships. And so one of the ways to make sure that this doesn't just recreate a boys' club, the old boys' club being the sort of old adage there, is that it has to be formalized. So all junior and mid-career staff know that they have somebody with whom to go to for advice, to talk about the direction of their career, and to learn the sort of ropes of the workplace, or what they might do next in their career or their job. So we heard over and over again how important this is, and leaders have the opportunity to make sure that this becomes formalized in their workplaces to the benefit of their own organizations. Okay, I will stop talking now and ask if there are any questions that are for me. So Tanya, I don't know if there are any questions in the chat yet, or if you might have some for me, but I'm ready to answer those.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Lisa. Really appreciate your presentation. I certainly have questions for you. Lots to think about, and it's not always easy to talk about this subject, and there could be many reasons why this might not be easy for people to talk about. I was gonna right off the bat say that I was really impressed by the accommodations that were made in the example you shared with us. And then right there, it's like when you said these are not accommodations, this is just a matter of reformatting the way we think about the work environment that was not necessarily created for a diversity of people that we all are. So that was such a great insight. Yeah, that's something that I'll take with me from this presentation for sure, and to allow us to think in a different perspective, because we're all not all the same. And so also thank you very much for sharing your own example, and how the association was so welcoming to have you here. So I would go back. This is not a question, it was just a preamble, I guess. I would go back to the beginning of your presentation, and you were showing the numbers for professional engineers and professional geoscientists. And we know that there is a discrepancy in terms of the numbers. So do you have any insight now, having been working with both women in engineering and geoscience, and in general with all of the association's members? Do you have any insight why there could be such a discrepancy in numbers?
Why the percentages are higher for geoscientists? I can venture one guess. I have one theory, and I'd love to hear other opinions on this. I mean, it is tough because, again, the total numbers are so different.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think, and I mean, we see this when we look at the breakdown for engineering disciplines, right? When we look at biosystems engineering or civil engineering, which both have environmental streams, or biosystems, very explicitly shows that it has programs that look at, food processing, food security. Civil engineering biosystems also have, ways to become trained in wastewater processing or water water systems engineering. These are things that are really evident in terms of their social and environmental impact. And so they attract women, right? We are sort of socialized towards helping professions. That's why you see such large numbers of women who are attracted to medicine, to nursing, to law, to pharmacy. And so we start to see more women attracted to those disciplines. And in geoscience, I mean, the name of the department at the University of Manitoba is Environment, Earth, and Resources, right? I wonder if that doesn't immediately attract more women into that study. And I wonder if you might have any more insights into that, Tanya, being a geoscientist yourself. But I mean, that's one of them for me. The imagery is really important, right? Like what we see in terms of the photos representing each of these departments, whether it's engineering or geoscience, those are really powerful messages that come across. If we see, people in a field taking samples, looking at possible sources of contamination or doing remediation, that's a powerful image. And so one of the things we are trying to encourage some of the engineering disciplines with low numbers of women to do, so specifically mechanical, electrical, and computer, is really trying to highlight the ways in which those streams very much have social and environmental impacts.
Right.
Those professionals are very much implicated in that work, but we need to be showing it. We need to be showing it with images and with the way we speak about it.
Yeah, it's
maybe,
an interesting.
Maybe you have insights on that.
Well, it's an interesting perspective. I didn't think about it that way, but also as a geoscientist, I don't necessarily know all of these nuances in the field of engineering, right? It's just we look at the numbers and that's the discrepancy you see. But when you break down the numbers, everything you said makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, biosystems is at almost 50%, and it was already that way when I was a student there 25 to 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really, really interesting.
Mhm.
This is also from not being involved in engineering so much. You mentioned the NGAP program so much. Could you give us a bit more detail? Because I'm not familiar
Sure.
with
So
it
the
at all.
NGAP is the Engineering Access Program. It is for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. NGAP students do the same degree in engineering as everybody else does. The difference is that there are supports there to recognize the fact that there are these huge gaps in the delivery of education. So like I had mentioned, there are, many schools in Northern Manitoba on reserve schools that they can't offer because of a chronic underfunding of education over decades and centuries, and residential schools, right? These are all the legacies of residential school system and racist delivery of programs, is that some can't even offer physics and chemistry to their students. And we have heard from people on our advisory committees, from the Indigenous Professionals Initiative committees, from the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, for example, that students are interested. It's not that there is a lack of interest in science and math from their students. It's that there is a lack of resources to properly and adequately develop the programs. So some schools don't have labs, for example.
Right.
They just can't deliver the programs.
So
So NGAP aims to close those gaps. So even if you could not take chemistry and physics to either get into, well, NGAP doesn't exist yet for the geosciences, as far as I know. But if you couldn't take your prerequisites, NGAP will support you in getting them. Or perhaps if they were accessible, but you need to improve your marks, NGAP will help you bring up your...
So like tuition, like somebody to help you out with the studies or something like that.
Yeah. And people to also help you find the financing. So we also know that it is a myth, right, that there is enough funding for all Indigenous students to be able to access post-secondary education. That is not true. There's not adequate funding for every student to be able to do that who wants to, and they make sure that their students can find that funding. There's also, there can be geographical barriers, relocation, big cultural differences in terms of living remotely as opposed to having to come to the city.
And a lot of these things, it's so different if you've never been through those kinds of experiences, right? I work in the North, but it's one thing is to work in the North and the other thing is to live in the North. So there are a lot of barriers, and the physical aspect is definitely one of them. I just wanted to point out in the chat, there was a comment from Mackenzie. It was again on the part of the system not built for different or being built for men with domestic support. And it's interesting you said the domestic support, because a lot of times, you look at the male X, Y, and Z, but you don't think like who's behind this person to help out in the career, right? So that's also very important. So there are a couple of comments regarding that, and definitely I think it's very important. We're almost out of time, and I have a quick question. I know that you're involved in the mentorship program. You're going to be talking about that in more detail later, I believe, at some other session, or I'm
No,
mistaken?
I'm not.
Oh,
no,
okay.
If you have a question about
I
mentorship,
do.
I can answer it now.
So because I was involved too as participants in the mentorship program that is just for females, but there's also another mentorship program that is relatively recent that involves whoever wants to participate. How successful has that other one been?
As far as I know, so you'll have to speak to my colleague Joy Fagdoba.
Okay, so you're not involved in both?
I am not involved in both programs, no. So I have helped to support and do most of the organizing now as a staff person for the Women in Engineering Geoscience Mentorship Program that was developed by our volunteers.
I wasn't sure.
Successfully developed that program.
Okay, I thought you were involved in both. I was just going to ask.
I'm not, but I do hear that it's quite successful. They've had a number of people register. I think it's coming up on the end of the first year of the program, and so as far as I've heard, successful, but I can't speak to any of the details.
It's great because mentorship is definitely important, either formal or informally, as you said. Like the informal mentorship is happening, but yeah, sometimes there are some barriers for that to happen. So it is important to just try to remove those.
Yes, agreed.
I was just checking out here on the chat. I don't see any other questions for you, Lisa. I really would like to, again, thank you for the presentation. Lots of insight, lots to think about. So yeah, thanks for your hard work. I think your contribution is extremely important to the success of the program, and I wish you luck with reaching the numbers.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who joined. If you think of questions or comments, you can feel free to email me as well. My email address is lstepnuk@enggeomb.ca, and it's of course available on our website. You can find it under the staff contact list.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much again. And thank you all for joining us at Ingenium. Don't forget, you can review this presentation at the Ingenium hubs. There'll be an on-demand library. The recordings for today and all of the sessions will be available from today until January. And you'll also be having access to exclusive professional development content. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you for watching. Visit the Ingenium On-Demand library for more exclusive content.